top, you have the black and white section at the bottom. I don't see what relationship these two things have with each other than that they're right next to each other. Almost seems like somebody took two things and just stuck them together without thinking about what the relationship is. When you're making a composition, it's not just about the individual parts, it's about how those parts relate to each other. And in this case, you have two parts that on their own are beautifully drawn. I'm not questioning the technique for a minute, but they don't relate to each other. And I think in some ways, that relationship is more important than having multiple pieces that look great by themselves but not great together. So really think about those relationships you're building and why those two things are together. It also doesn't help that the Buddhas are all in color and then the other section's all black and white. And so you also have that kind of division in terms of color as well that's not helping you. What I really enjoy about this painting of oranges is that it seems really obvious to me that you took the initiative to actually set up this still life. And I think a lot of students don't do that. I think they'll just put something on a table and start drawing it. And I love the fact that some of the oranges are peeled, that some of the rinds are torn at the side. It seems like you did a really great job of arranging things. I also like how dense this composition is. I mean, it almost feels claustrophobic in a way. It's almost like there's no space to breathe, but that's exactly what's so great about it, is that it does feel so packed with form. You did a great job, I think, of describing the shininess, but also the texture of the oranges. I think that's very apparent as I'm looking at the piece, that we can really see the lighting, the way, especially I think that orange in the lower left-hand corner, the way that the glistening light that falls across the surface of that orange, I think is beautifully done. I think it'd be really great if some of the oranges that were towards the bottom, if you made those a lot darker, those would sink down into the space, because right now it's almost like you're being too fair to all the oranges. It's almost like you're letting all of the oranges be the main event, but they can't all be the main event. I think what I recommend that you do is you pick maybe 3 or 4 oranges that are at the top and make those really bright and very luminous, and then make everything else push back. Just darken them a little bit, and that will really make the difference. I'm really excited about this piece because it seems like there's a very specific narrative that you're trying to convey. The narrative is quite ambiguous. We're not totally sure what's going on, but I think that's great. I think it's a piece that really piques your curiosity. It gets you to think about things. It's quite different than some of your other pieces that I think are more just copies of photographs. So I'm really excited to see this particular painting. I think it's great the way you have the movement shifting downwards and then these 2 feet that are floating towards the top. I think the transition of the figure, where the figure's breaking apart, disintegrating into these little specks into the background, that's wonderful. I think that's one of the best transitions that I've seen in some of your work. I think the 2 feet, though, are a little bit too separate. I wish that the feet also had that same disintegrating kind of pattern, particularly that area above the ankle. I think that would get the feet to interact with the background more. Right now, the feet have this really crisp, solid outline around them, and I feel like if they could sink into the painting a little bit more, you would get them to interact. I feel like they're almost collaged into the painting at this point. And again, that black background that you have, it's so flat. The only area that I really think the black background is working is where the figure is disintegrating. You have these little dots, and that starts to kind of activate it more. So maybe the way to do it would be to have the areas that are disintegrating in the figure, make those bigger, make them extend out further, and then you have a reason to fill that black space. Because the black space, I really feel like there's too much of it. I think it's okay to have this dramatic lighting situation. I think that would work fine. It's just we kind of are getting this overdose of black. But I do think that in this piece, there's a subtlety and sensitivity that I don't see very much in some of your other pieces. Even though there are areas that are detailed, there are also some areas that are a little bit more plain, and I like that. I like that you're giving us some areas to breathe a little bit more, and then we can really go back and appreciate some of those details.
just going to buy one mascara, or all of them. These are cute. Unicorn floaty, totally necessary. Check out. Often distracted or impulsive? Talk to your doctor to see if it may be ADHD and click to learn more.
Find your style at Menards with 11% off Patriot Lighting.
Or you could add stylish storage with 11% off all Dakota shelving.
Insulate and save big on energy costs. Plus get 11% off.
Create your dream clear view kitchen with 11% off.
You'll be floored by our vinyl plank flooring. Get 11% off all of it.
Whatever you're working on, you'll get 11% off. Now at Menards.
Save big money at Menards.
Welcome to the Kill Count, where we tally up the victims in all our favorite horror movies. I'm James A. Janice, and today we're looking at Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Scary Stories is based on the children's books of the same name released between 1981 and 1991. These three collections of short horror stories were written by Alvin Schwartz and memorably illustrated by Stephen Gammell. Seeing Gammell's creepy-ass charcoal and ink artwork is one of my earliest horror-related memories, as I'm sure it is also for many other people around my age. In fact, the more I think about it, the more likely it is that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark helped prime baby James to become the horror-obsessed man James of today. Cause I'm a Mario! That's why I like that this movie's PG-13. Not every horror movie has to be an over-the-top gore fest or a horrifying brain breaker. We also need good stuff for children, you know, to hook them while they're young. I think Scary Stories succeeds, just like Amblin movies did in the 80s, as a gateway horror flick for kids and the more faint-hearted among us, even if it does feel a little sluggish between all the scenes with monsters. Thankfully, though, the team behind this movie was faithful to the original Gammell drawings that, let's be real, made the book's classics. It helps that producer Guillermo del Toro is a personal fan of the artwork, and even acquired some of it in the most Guillermo del Toro way possible.
Turned out he actually owned some of the original art. Guillermo's like, oh yeah, I bought 10 of them at a store, in the New Line building from under Tim Burton's nose as it happened.
Del Toro and director Andre Overdahl worked with talented artists and sculptors to transfer these nightmare-inducing illustrations into full-fledged 3D figures, a task they did not take lightly.
The most challenging aspect of translating Gammell's drawings from the books to real life is people's expectations, because these adults now, read these books as children, so what you're basically creating for them or recreating for them is an old family member that they've never met.
Overdahl employed these creatures in suspenseful and well-directed set pieces, which are made even better since they involve well-acted and likable kid characters. But just because they're kid characters doesn't mean they can't get murdered. So let's see how many bite the big one and get to the kills. The movie begins in 1968 in Mill Valley, Pennsylvania. And in case you weren't sure it was 1968, we've got Nixon Humphrey posters with political graffiti on them, kids signing up to die overseas in a televised war, and some psychedelic Donovan on the soundtrack.
Must be the season of the witch.
Oh, and also some small-town skepticism of this not-white stranger from out of town, a kid named Ramon. Today is Halloween, and some walkie-talkie plans are made between friends Stella, Augie, and Chuck, who's about to use that net right there to go toilet fishing. Here's a nice piece of shit. It's their last year trick-or-treating together before they're too old to do it, so they've all arranged to wear their best costumes. Spooky Witch, an actual Spider-Man, and David Bowie from the Ashes to Ashes music video. These unpopular dorky kids are using Chuck's toilet treats to trick leather jacket bully Tommy Milner and his crew, whose attempts to steal their candy yields them a different chocolate prize.
Oh man, oh no!
The kids follow up on stage one of their prank with a whole bunch of eggs and a flaming bag of shit.
Now for the truth this time.
Don't put it out with your boots, Tommy. He sees that it's poop again and crashes his car, which sends the nerds running away with Tommy and his bros in hot pursuit. They chase them into the drive-in theater where Stella comes across Ramon in his car and asks the stranger for sanctuary. Chuck and Augie hop in too. Ramon and Stella